Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is April 20th, 2022. For those of you who might be new to this format, this live format, this is a time when I'll take any questions and topics that you want me to address live. We also take any pre-submitted questions. So if you're listening to this broadcast on the podcast, you can, even if you're not a subscriber to our webinars, which means that you're a current or a former client of Evoke's, even if you're not that, you can always send in questions or topics to webinar@evoketherapy.com, and we're happy to answer them live on the broadcast, live on the webinar, and then that gets turned into a podcast the next day, and you can listen there. So just to give you a little bit of that background. If you are, this is also available for family and friends live of Evoke clients. So if you're a family or a friend of an Evoke client and you're asking a question, you can let us know your relationship. If you're under 18, if you're not an adult or you're asking for a child, please let me know your age. It helps me to speak more precisely to the person asking the question, because I'm going to answer, of course, a question very differently to an 8-year-old than I am going to a 60-year-old. So make sure you let me know that, or an aunt or an uncle or some other relative. I might have a different response or angle to provide for you. So with that, let's get into the pre-submitted questions and see what we have. Somebody writes, do all students do solos? This was, in fact, I think I saw this question pop up at the tail end of the broadcast that I did last night on solos as an intervention. Not necessarily. It's our hope that all clients, all students will have the opportunity to do at least one solo, maybe two, depending upon their length of stay. But clinical readiness is going to affect that. It's possible that the group as a whole might not be in a place for solos. There might be some risk in terms of putting them out on their solo experience, and in those cases, it might be delayed, and therefore the child might miss it. We're going to want, out of a group of 8 or 9 clients, we're going to want at least 6 or 7, hopefully 8 or 9, to be able to go out on solos, to be clinically ready to do that. So there are some variables, but it's our hope that every student, we cross our fingers that all the stars align, that every student gets an opportunity to do solos at least once. So that's the answer to that. I hope that makes sense. All right, next question, a little bit longer. In fact, these are the two shortest and longest questions back to back that I've ever seen. So this next question reads like this: I cannot be my authentic self around my family of origin. When I'm authentic, I often get disrespected and put down. For example, if I've accomplished something that I'm really proud of in my life, they might belittle it. If I try to tell them how I feel, my feelings are often not seen as valid. If I set a boundary, they might take pleasure in crossing the boundary and laugh about it like it's a game. I don't want to spend my free time hiding and hurting. My dad, sister, and aunt are the worst, but the rest of the system supports them, I assume. I don't really trust them, especially around my children. It's so hard to provide this foundation for my kids when I don't have it myself. I'm tired of struggling through parenting without healthy examples. I long for a family, but I suppose what I'm looking for is a stable sense of healthy community and support. I have guilt and shame for stepping back, but I don't see any other way. Any thoughts or ideas on how to handle this situation or feeling more grounded? I so glad that you asked this question, and I couldn't be happier to answer it, because I think it speaks to the crux of so many important issues in this work, and not a very common challenge, actually. You know, let me kind of take everybody through the thinking that goes into this question. As we grow in our process, we will find that we will outgrow people and contexts. And there's real grief, even if it's not like it was all bad in those old relationships, friendships, in this case, the family of origin. There might be positive things to it, but at times we have to step away and step back. I've talked about this. In fact, I posted on Instagram just yesterday that so often people show up in hopes of trying to forgive somebody because that's in their heart. They want to feel that peace that comes with forgiveness, but they're oftentimes still being abused. So in this case, you're overtly, clearly being abused. By the way, as you all know, they won't agree to that. They won't see it that way. They will gaslight you. They will tell you that that's just a pop psychology term that we use for dismissing, discounting what somebody feels. They will tell you you're being too sensitive. They will tell you you're overreacting. They will tell you that they're just kidding. They'll tell you that you're becoming too therapy or new agey or somehow to make you feel like you're the crazy one. So it goes back to something I talk about, which is kind of, I was just talking to this with Malia. I was talking about this idea that, this is a situation where you can't win. You can't get what you're hoping for, which is a family of origin that can just support you and your boundaries and your growth and feel that connection. Of course, you long for community and support. That's a natural human instinct. We as a species would not have survived if we didn't gather in groups. It's in our DNA. It's embedded in all of our DNA. And so this idea of longing for something that you can't get is a tremendous loss, a tremendous grief. So you show up when you can. I talked about this some time ago. When people show up to relationships because they should, or because they wish it would go well, they end up either abusing the other person, lashing out, being critical, nagging, or they end up abusing themselves, which looks like denying your feelings or repressing your feelings. So the fact of the matter is, what you're describing is not at all uncommon. I think it's a little bit more clear in your case than some. I think some it can be a little bit more subtle. Maybe your work has revealed a subtle process to be more explicit. That's something you can be proud of. But you're not imagining it. It's very common. In fact, it's actually much, much more common than the other, which is that as people grow, families, loved ones support the development of boundaries, the development of a healthy self, the change that goes on. That's that's a unicorn in life. Most often you're going to have this kind of experience. So, I mean, you get to choose how to lose. And in this case, if you want to preserve a sense of well-being, it sounds like from what you're describing, that the losing will look like being alone and looking for your people. I said this some time ago after checking in with an old client and having a conversation. She shared with me that she's out searching for her people. That's where she is in the process. And I think that's, in fact, she's on here tonight. How you doing? Um, I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find people, be around people that can support us. And to find our tribe is a heroic endeavor because it means we have to tolerate being alone. I wrote this week on my social media account, which often gets shared by the Evoke team also at the same time, that we have to face the dragon or the fear, if you will, of being alone in order to have true intimacy. If we can't be alone, we'll keep ourselves in abusive and toxic relationships. So we have to kind of, that's the dark night of soul. That's the belly of the whale in Joseph Campbell's model of examining myths. That's going into the darkness. I remember I asked, one of my favorite resources of all time is the movie Finding Joe. If you haven't read it yet, you'll hear me talk about it now and again because I love it so much. You can go to YouTube and Patrick Solomon has released it for free. He has a last name. I apologize, I can't pronounce it right now, but it's called Finding Joe by the director and producer's name is Patrick. And if you go there, you can watch this video. And one of the things they explain to you is this heroic journey, this algorithm, if you will, that Joseph Campbell came up with when exploring mythology, and was saying that there's just one story, and he called it the hero's journey. It was first illustrated in his seminal book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces that I think came out in the late 1940s or 1950s. At any rate, there's a point in time in which we have to face our dragon. That in mythology can look like a dragon, and in real life can be to face our fear, to face our shame, to face our guilt, to kind of confront it. And I remember after showing this video to a group of parents, I had a parent reach back out to me and say to me, I can't even get to my dragon battle because my family is discouraging me, won't let me go. This was, by the way, this was the parent of a client. This was a full grown adult in her, I imagine, 40s or 50s. And she came to me saying, I can't even get to the dragon battle because my family is discouraging me and not supporting me and going out and following my bliss, following my passion. And I responded, I said, that is the dragon battle. And so I'll say it to you as gently as I can that this is the battle. What I have found out when I have, it's Patrick, I'll try to say it, Takaya. You probably know Malia because you lived in Hawaii and know the language better. Patrick Solomon is his name, but anyway, it is Takaya. Yeah, it is the experience of facing the thing that would keep you stuck. The heroic journey is going out and facing the fear. And what the hero discovers, what your children at Evoke are discovering, what you can explore and discover if you come to a Finding You, to an Evoke Intensive, is yourself, your most authentic self, who you are. In one of my books, I explain a small example of this. Not quite the exact same, but very, very similar. At least the lesson, the takeaway is the same. In the book, I described that my children were hoping that their mother, my ex-wife, that she, my two older children, were explaining she'd just gone through a divorce and this was going to be her first holiday season alone. And they were conflicted because they didn't want to leave her alone and they were inclined to support her by being there for her during the holiday season. And I could fully understand that. And in fact, I wanted to support them and say, you know what? Whatever you feel like you need to do, you're allowed to do. I was sad that there was this dynamic of children taking care of the parent, but this was a rare circumstance, and I could understand it. So, short story, I suggested that they do whatever they need to do. So I went into therapy that week, my therapy, and I'm presenting this dilemma, this unwinnable thing to my therapist. I'm saying, look, I want my children to be there for the holidays. I'm okay to make the sacrifice if they're not, if they need to be, if they feel like they need to be there for their mother. I could solve this by inviting her over because it's not like we fight. It's not like we have a high conflict relationship. But if she came for the holiday, it's a little bit unnatural for me, right? I couldn't let my hair down. I couldn't wear my pajamas all day long like I like to on Christmas. And I would feel like I was on. Okay. So I'm telling this story to my therapist and I'm getting to the point where I'm trying to ask, what should I do? And I realize it's a problem because the dragon's name is should. That's what Campbell calls the dragon of should and should not. He actually borrowed it from Friedrich Nietzsche, who named it the dragon of thou shalt. So I'm about to ask the question using should or shalt, and I know I'm in trouble because should doesn't make sense. Should is a construct. Should is an obligation that is made up, right? It's somebody else's idea about the way a person is supposed to be. So I said I can't even formulate a question without the word should. But I said, if you'll just kind of allow me to be sloppy at it, isn't the ideal that I'm mature enough, capable enough, I have the wherewithal in me to invite my ex-wife, their mother, over for the holidays and to be okay with it? Shouldn't I have developed enough character strength and grace and forgiveness and acceptance just to welcome her in and embrace her with open arms to the holiday? And after I finished fumbling with the question, asking it to my therapist, she said, as simple as can be, she said, I think the goal is to be who you are. And I thought, of course, it's so easy to forget that that's the goal. I am who I am. I'm not there in some weird way. I wish I was, which is part of the war going on inside, but I'm not ready. I don't feel comfortable. It doesn't feel okay to me. And since I was taught as a child that prioritizing me was selfish, I was stuck, right? But with the invitation and the idea and the welcoming from my therapist that the goal is to be who you are, and then out of that comes the greatest amount of love possible, the greatest amount of wisdom, creativity, spontaneity in the world, which I know, of course. I know, of course, when I'm not in the mix of it, in the soup of it, if you will. Um, I concluded after all of that that I'm not going to invite her over this time. And my children spent a good deal of time with the holidays with us and found time to support her and be with her. And almost predictably, almost magically, as you might imagine, because I was able to do that, the next holiday that rolled around, I thought, you know what? I'll have her over, and it'll be easier for the kids, and I think it'll be okay for me. I think I feel okay about that. I feel okay about that. And I invited over, and it was absolutely wonderful. And there's been one or two since then. This was several years ago where she hasn't come over for one reason or another, but she's invited on every Thanksgiving, and we celebrate Christmas and every Christmas holiday since then. And we have the best time as a group. Even she and I have fun interactions together, and we have fun interactions being with the larger family together. So the problem is we think we should be something else. We wish we were farther along. We wish we could let it go. And it really is, if you can, you can. See, that's what psychology does. Is it turns it from a should into a what is. Psychology is about embracing the reality of life. Like what is happening. I was sharing a quote some time ago, and somebody shared with me, it reminded them of the is ought dilemma. I think it was the philosopher Hume. I'm not sure about that. Not sure about that. Malia, you can look up that and see if I'm getting the wrong philosopher. The is ought dilemma. And basically what this philosopher argued is we can all kind of agree on what is in some basic sense. We can agree that on gravity. We can agree that the earth rotates around the sun. We can agree that when we get in water, we get wet. We can agree on those things. But what we can't really agree to, in fact, he argues, I think, that we can never really access is what ought to be. But we humans, I hear it all the time. I heard it today in a conversation that I had. It is David Hume. Thank you, Malia. I simply said to somebody, I asked a question. I like, why would you do that? And I was really asking, why would you do that? And I asked it in a tone like, I'm curious, why would you do that? And about 3 or 4 minutes later, the person said to me, I know you said I should do this. And I said, I never said should. But our brains are so wired for ought, right? The dragon of thou shalt and thou shalt not lives in here. And that's where we do the battle, the dragon battle. And so and this happens all the time, even asking a question from a curious place to somebody will activate their should sensibility. They will hear it. They will actually hear you say, you should do this. It's why I said I've heard people many times reference me, my clients, parent coaching clients, people in the social media arena. I have heard people say, Brad Reedy says you should do this. And my thought is, I don't use those words. In fact, even if you press me, I actually don't believe that anybody should do anything. I believe you do what you can. And the great fear, of course, if we don't live by shoulds, is that we'll devolve into immoral, hedonistic, unbridled, undisciplined monsters. That's what we fear. That's what we've been told to fear. But what we learn about as we heal is that when you become who you are, your very fundamental nature is wise and kind and loving and generous and all those other things, right? The selfishness, I don't even like that word, but self-centeredness, the lack of being stingy as opposed to generous, being rigid instead of creative and spontaneous, being cruel instead of loving. All of those come from trauma, both specific event traumas and also the developmental trauma that we had growing up. So this process that we go through, in my opinion, is about becoming who we are. And that's why you have to spend a lot of time to do that with an empathic other, with a non-judgmental other, with somebody who doesn't know your truth, who doesn't know what you should and shouldn't do, who honors your process, which is messy and crooked and forwards and backwards and sideways. Because that's what becoming a person, becoming a self is. It's messy business. It's not a pristine growth curve. So absolutely, your question is wonderful. In the end, you don't get to be right or good or win. You get to choose how to lose, and I would stand right behind you if you decide that you want to stay. I wrote a blog a couple of years ago, very similar kind of thought, saying why you shouldn't go home for Thanksgiving with should in quotes. Why you should not go home to Thanksgiving, of course, making a point about the should word. And I explain how you can go home if you want. You can go home out of guilt and obligation. You can go home with new eyes and ears to see. You can go home because you want to. And you can also stay away. But because we were taught there was a right way to do this life, we lose access to all the wisdom that we were born with, ironically. So, yeah, that's a really fantastic, wonderful question. Thank you for asking it. And you're not alone, not even close to alone. Somebody writes, my daughter went to Evoke 2.5 years ago. She's doing well. But I wanted to share that I'm still using the skills I learned from Naranon meetings, webinars. No question. Just a big thank you. You're welcome. And like I've said before, I'm just passing on to you something that somebody taught to me. I was talking to a colleague the other day, trying to help them in their own process as a therapist and as a person and as an employee. And I was explaining to them, I was like, I've been there. I've thought how you've thought for years, for more than 40 years. This all started to unravel for me around 2009 and 10, right? I know what it's like to hold on to those old core beliefs. And I know that I'm not done by any means. It's a journey, but I've been there. I've struggled with this stuff. It took me, I wrote something not too long ago that said, the journey of the heroic parent comes from 20 years of practicing wilderness therapy with families and young people. That's the cost of that book in terms of my life. And the audacity to be you, I say, and it's not an exaggeration. It nearly cost me my life. Right? I got to some of the darkest, most anxious and depressed places in my life, and I either had to give up, right? Just quit, or I had to keep going. And luckily, I have a wonderful wife who was supportive, and she kept going. And I have a really, really wonderful, beautiful therapist that sat beside me while I struggled to find the door that was 6 feet away from me the entire time, that I couldn't imagine going through. So thank you. Somebody writes, there aren't many webinars that I've seen that deal with adopted children. We adopted our daughter at the age of 10 from foster care, so some of the advice doesn't quite seem to fit. She has had so many problems when we adopted her. I think you're right. I think we've probably only done 2 or 3. Malia, maybe you can look up on the spreadsheet that we have for adoption or adopted children. 20 things that adopted children want their adopted parents to know is a great resource. Um, I guess my response is you're right. It's not specifically addressing adoption, but the principles are the same. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your child. I'm going to be facetious just to illustrate. It doesn't matter if your child is adopted, a drug addict, has ASD, is a mute, is green, blue, yellow, red, gray, tall, short. When you walk into an Al Anon meeting, when you walk into a Nar-Anon meeting, when you walk into a Codependence Anonymous meeting, everybody's story is different than yours. In fact, you'll find that a lot of them are talking about their spouses. And the first thought that will come to you is, I don't know how to apply that person's share, that person's wisdom to my experience with my 14-year-old child on the autism spectrum, or my adopted child with an attachment disorder that was in place long before I even came along, right? But as you keep listening, you start to hear the same thing. You start to hear. That's why in the Audacity to Be You, I often talk about the other, right? What it means to be a person and to love an other, not another, but an other, because there are principles that apply. Now, somebody on the autism spectrum disorder has very different needs and challenges than somebody that's struggling with an addiction to opiates, right? Somebody that is depressed and anxious might look very different from somebody who's oppositionally defiant, right? That looks very different. If it's not your birth child, there's always the given and the made. The given is what they came with. And even if it's your birth child, there's still a given that once they're born, you can't change. What they were born with, their neurology. You can have I have 4 birth children, and they all have very different neurologies. And so that's the starting point for all of us. And then it's like, how do I love an alcoholic husband or an alcoholic wife or partner? How do I love a drug addicted child? How do I support and show up for them in the ways that they need? How do I show up with somebody with Asperger's? There are specific skills and tools and concepts that I'm sure are unique to every one of those individual, unique circumstances. And there's also something that you have in common with everybody else. And that's what I try to speak to, is that transcendent underpinning. I think when I was doing these broadcasts many years ago, I've been doing them since December of 2007. And right now it is April of 2022. Every week, once or twice a week. I think in the early years, I probably spent a lot of time talking about individual diagnoses, individual ideas, skills, decisions, concepts in each of those. But what I found was, after doing it for a few years, was people were always able to find the exception. If I was talking about ASD, somebody said, well, my child is higher on the spectrum. If I was talking about addiction to opiates, somebody says, well, my child's just abusing marijuana. If I was talking about anxiety, somebody said their child was depressed. If I was talking about somebody that was internally, going inside of themselves in an anxious, shutdown way, then they told me that their child was a little bit more acting out. So after a while, I realized something needs to be more transcendent than that. I would absolutely encourage you to go to read the literature on adoption or whatever specific diagnosis your child has, and get the wisdom from those people who speak to those things. But this is about what it means to be a person and to love another. And those skills are fairly universal. And when you have a child when you adopt a child at 10, there's trauma already there. You had nothing to do with that, which then requires you to do more work. Does that make sense? People say to me, well, yeah, that works when your child's typical, but my child is X, Y, or Z. My child is adopted. My child is a drug addict. And my response is, yes, in children that suffer from mental health issues like attachment disorder or addiction, require more work, require you to go to places to get fed with more information, more support, more encouragement, more listening, empathic ears. So my heart goes out to you. I don't have adopted children. I've spoken to it on a few occasions. You're right, we don't have a lot in it. And I'm kind of speaking to the things that all of us share in this process. And I'll just close with this question with this. In my experience, it's more the same than it is different. Thank you for sharing the few that we've done on that, Malia, with the group. I appreciate it. Somebody writes there, my son did a solo recently and was most successful during the program during that solo. How do you reconcile his relative success on a solo versus in the general programming? I imagine that a lot of his issues come up when there's interpersonal issues. That's my I think I said during the broadcast that you know I want to talk about introversion in just a second, but that there are some children who struggle interpersonally or struggle with anxiety who prefer solos, and there are some children who thrive in the social contexts who despise and suffer through the solo. And so part of it is you learn about yourself. I would ask him what that means. I could take some guesses, of course, but I would ask him how he makes sense out of that. One of the things that's happened to me during the pandemic, it's not I'm not splitting the atom here, but one of the things that's happened during the pandemic is the realization that I get energized by being alone and I spend energy when I'm with others. I'm just that way, good or bad or anywhere in between. And so I've learned, and I'm learning this more and more. This goes back to that idea of being alone, that my self protection, that my self care is about being alone. And when you're a father of four, that's challenging. When you're married, it's challenging to say to your wife, to your husband, to your partner, I'm unavailable, because it feels like to them that's where they draw on their support. So you're letting them down. But part of I guess part of the takeaway from that description of your child's experience with solo would be maybe that's something about him that's important. Maybe he can take away from that when he feels stressed or overwhelmed, that taking a lot of quiet time, and how much quiet time is the right amount of quiet time for somebody to engage in per day. I'm sure there are 7 or 8 billion answers to that question. There's many people that live on the planet. Right? It is who he is. Um, but I think it's a curious thing. I think there could be deeper, more intricate ideas and concepts involved in it. I always want to say, when I'm a therapist and I'm reporting to parents about how the week goes, making fires, going on solo, participating in group hiking, whatever it is. Part of it is updating, but a part of my job is to make sense out of it and to help you make sense out of it. See, the job of a therapist, as I see it at Evoke, when they're giving their weekly updates, is to tell a story that makes everything that the child does make sense. Because in a certain context, it always makes sense, even when it's irrational, even when it's illogical, even when it seems at cross purposes with what you imagine the goal of life to be. Some people will sink their own boat, right? Some people will self-sabotage. But you take a deeper look, and somehow those behaviors that we look at as nonsensical as making sense. The phrase, cut off your nose to spite your face, there's a reason that people do that. See, that's what compassionate, capable therapy teaches us. That everything that a person does makes sense in the context in which they've lived. So it's our job to discover that context. It can't be necessarily observed objectively from the outside. The child has to tell us that. When I am talking to people, I get overwhelmed. And so sitting by myself, I can relax. My nervous system downregulates, so forth and so on. So it's our job to understand our children. And part of what we're trying to do is understand the world that they've lived in. And we don't know what it is just because we're sitting in our world. That's why I explain in the Audacity to be you, that to understand somebody, we have to, in essence, lose our mind and start listening in a deeper, more profound way than any of us were taught, than was modeled for almost any of us. Thank you for all those posts for all the adoption stuff, Malia. I appreciate it. Somebody writes, "Do you have words for families like ours that cannot afford the recommended aftercare for our child? We've tried everything and have hit the limit of our resources. We have been grieving this reality for the past few days and now doing the work of providing services to transition home. We know more than ever that my child's coming home is really about us, the parents. I'm terrified, actually, but I know that this is the dragon now, and it is my job to face it." Isn't that the truth? I love it. I do have a few thoughts about it. Uh, I'm glad that you asked the question. Sometimes you might not be surprised that I say that almost tongue in cheek, because of course I talk to people who can't even afford the first intervention. I talk to people who can't even afford a therapy session. So you find sources of support. I mean, that's why we offer. I'll go to the for those watching live, I'll go to the slide that talks about it. That's why we suggest to parents to give Al-Anon or Nar-Anon. Somebody talked about it earlier. Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, AdultChildren.org, which is really, really good. I would encourage all of you to try that once in part of your experimenting with sex. Also, refugerecovery.org is a support group. All of these are free of charge, no cost. You can even do them online. So if you have a computer, you don't even have to drive. You don't even have to put gas in your car. And then the National Alliance on Mental Health, or excuse me, it's called NAMI. It's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Also have free resources in most larger cities, right? That you can go to and get classes and get support. So find places and people, listening to the podcast, reading the books. It's a practice. I go back to therapy each week at 11 Mountain Time with my therapist. And I've been going to the same person for 23 years. I go back each week, not because I'm in crisis, not because I'm unhappy, not because I have a problem to be solved, but I go back to reconnect with myself. Because that place, which right now is, when the pandemic came, we switched to Zoom, and we haven't gone back with my therapist. That's the safest place to be me. That's the one place when I won't be told that I'm doing it wrong. And in that safety, ironically, paradoxically, that's when I discover all of myself. So I find myself in books. I find myself in podcasts and in stories. So if you're lacking financial resources, which most people have an end to those, then finding these other sources of support, these other places to hear the message, to hear the thinking. Why I like producing the podcast for everybody, not just for Evoke families, is because it's a free resource to reconnect to yourself. It's not like I'm telling you brand new things every time. There's a if you listen to 2 or 3 on a long road trip, you'll be like, this dude's saying the same thing over and over again. It's to reconnect to a way of thinking, a level of consciousness. The same kind of, when Albert Einstein said that we can't solve a problem at the same level of consciousness in which it was created, that's what I'm doing. It's transcendent. It's higher. It's more. It's different. And keep listening. So ideally, having a therapist, I say this, and I'll go on to the next question after this point, because it fits with this question. We know 2 things in mental health. We know them very, very confidently. Number 1, the greatest contribution a parent can make to a child's well-being, health, resiliency is a secure attachment. The secure attachment is a calm, peaceful presence. It is safety, physically and emotionally. It is non-judgment. It is patience, non-reactive, right? Maintaining the ability to maintain curiosity and what researchers call response flexibility, which means you're choosing your response, you're not acting out. So number 1, we know that the greatest contribution a parent can make is to a child's well-being long-term is a secure or a healthy attachment. And a healthy attachment is feeling safe and welcomed as you are. Okay. This is the magical part of it. The second thing that we know is that the ability to provide that healthy or that secure attachment is best predicted by far by how much work the parent has done to unravel their own history, to look at, as Alice Miller says, the unique emotional history of their childhood, how you were built, what your parents said and did, what your siblings said and did, what your peers, what the culture said to you and did. We have to look at that stuff. We have to look back critically with a critical eye. But because we are still often carrying around our parents or the adults' defenses, because that's how we were trained, we're afraid to do that. We think it's a victim stance. We think it's blame. We think it's a waste of time. Even therapists will often teach that, who don't know the work, who haven't done the work. So you do your work. That's the best. If you want to contribute to your child's success, the simple takeaway is the best thing you can do is to do your work on your family of origin, for you to make yourself the project, not the child the project. When you work on yourself, you can then show up to the child, and the child you can be there for the child's needs because you've taken care of your needs somewhere else. We really need to normalize. We would do well to normalize showing up to our relationships, our partnerships, and our parenting relationships already fed and well. But when we show up unwell because we think we should, or that's what good parents do, or good partners do, we end up hurting them or ourselves. So the answer is do your work. Anywhere from the free stuff. If you have the ability to go to an intensive, I cannot endorse it more than I do. Attending an intensive, in fact, there's one going on right now, and we have one every month, right? Our next one is May 18th. Attend an intensive because that is a springboard into your own work. Or if you've done work, it's an accelerator of your work. That's the way I experienced it because I'd done a significant amount of work before joining it. Somebody reads, I've not related much to the family of origin stuff as it relates to my parents, but I noticed tons of stuff with my 3 siblings. Can you talk about the difference between parent-child dysfunction and sibling dysfunction and how they are or aren't connected? I've actually thought that I have probably underemphasized the impact of siblings over the years. Maybe it's because I'm not talking to siblings, and why talk to somebody about something they can't control? Maybe if I was talking to the siblings, plus their children also, most likely somewhere in the general vicinity of around the same age. Um, so two things. Of the two or three thoughts. We'll see how many I get in here. Number one, it might be worse than you thought. It might be. I joke and I tease that when someone tells me they had a good childhood, I say to them, therapy can fix that. And it's both a joke and it's true. I shared about a week or two ago from the book Context that one of the simplest statements where the client realized that things were much worse than he imagined. So there is trauma that's invisible to us. There is trauma that we don't relate to. So I'll just put that out there. It might not apply to you, but I want to put that out there because it would be unusual. It would be very, very rare to not have significant developmental issues, dents and bruises from your parents. And it would be very rare to know what they are when you're first presented with this model. Almost nobody says, yeah, I see that. So that's number one. Number two, your parents were the parents of all of the siblings too, I imagine. And there was a culture in the family that contributed to what your siblings may or may not have done to you. But, we really do talk about family of origin broadly. We don't specify necessarily parents. Alice Miller, when she says in the most important book that's ever been written about children, in my opinion, The Drama of the Gifted Child, She doesn't say, the quote goes like this: we have only one enduring weapon. We have only one enduring weapon in our fight against mental illness, and that is the discovery of the unique emotional history of our childhood. She doesn't say the unique emotional history of our childhood as it relates to our parents. She says the unique emotional history of our childhood. I think oftentimes our siblings are a significant and maybe even a profound, a large part of that context. I often see people relating to, I talk to my wife about this all the time, relating to their partners the way that they related to their siblings. My wife and I joke about that all the time. So I think it's all the soup. I think there might be more than you see, but don't worry about that. And there might not be. And I think it's all about, like, what was the home life like? And why wasn't somebody, I've heard people talk about their siblings abusing them. And the question is, where were the adults? What happened when you reported it to them? Why didn't you report it to them if you didn't? Did you not feel like they could keep you safe? So I think there's plenty to work on, even if you only look at your siblings. Thanks for the question. Somebody says, why is finding you a prerequisite to returning to you? What are the significant differences between the two? It's just about finding you as an introduction to the family of origin work, right? And so returning to you makes the assumption that you've taken a deep dive into the work. We're not starting at the beginning. That's all. It's just a continuation. What we will tell you is that returning to you, it's not finding you too, right? Returning to you is anybody who's gone through finding you has had an experience or introduction into the family of origin work, and then returning to you is subsequent to that. So if you've been twice, I've had many people come already to their second finding you, or to finding you two when we used to call it that. And now anybody that's been to finding you could come to returning to you. So we're not starting, if we allowed anyone to come, then the returning to you folks that have been to an intensive already would know things, and we'd have to be explaining it for the first time, spending a lot of our time introducing for the first time some of the work to the new people. So just that. Somebody writes, looking at aftercare programs, I am having a lot of anxiety about picking the right one. Our educational consultant has recommended 3, but they are quite different. And the one that I would have rejected is her first pick. Of course, there's a lot more to this, but curious if you have any thoughts. Just, one of my passionate supports of all of you is ask difficult questions. You deserve intelligent answers to difficult questions. You really do. So press them on it. Ask them, why can these look so different? And they need to have an answer. It can't just be, I don't know, I just threw them out there. Why do you like the first one versus the second one? Why is the one that you like the most the one that you like the most? So ask them difficult questions. And if they're impatient or intolerant of your questions, that's not about you. You're just a student. And the student doesn't need to be punished for not knowing. That's the job of the student. So I would say, and I think most of us, including me, we're afraid to be bad clients, bad customers, needy people. You see? And so all of our stuff from our family of origin, going back to that, all of our stuff will come up in this exchange. That's why, as a therapist at Evoke, and I try to teach this to all of our therapists, if a client challenges you, a parent, if a parent challenges you, if the parent asks you a difficult question, if the parent tells you they're upset with you, please, please, please embrace and celebrate that, because it takes a great deal of courage to confront authority figures. Because when we were children, we were told we were being disobedient or disrespectful or too needy. Name your insult. So be yourself. And as you continue to explore therapists, all of you in every capacity, if therapists punish you for challenging them or sharing difficult feelings with them, like, I'm angry, I'm hurt, I'm sad, you can find new therapists. Find a new therapist who's done enough work, who's grounded enough that when you tell them those things, when you express those things, they not only are okay with it, but they celebrate it. That's how you encourage and foster the development of a healthy self in a client. Is you celebrate them being themselves with you and being a safe person for that. As an intensive alumna, I can say it was a game changer. I did it at the beginning of my son's therapeutic stay, and it helped me understand his work in conjunction with my own. Thank you. Yeah, I've been, I don't know the number. I should go back and count it if I'm going to report it, but I've been to around 9 myself as a participant. And I'm the I'm the biggest fan. And I'm a therapist who's extensively trained. So it's not about new information that happens, but it's about the experience, the immersive experience of an intensive. For years now, I would often call my partner Rick Heiser, our executive director, on the way home from our intensives, and I would say to him, "Best one ever." And every time I met him, I meant it. There, it can happen, but it's rare, very rare that it's not life changing, grounding. So again, I think it's the best use of your time and money that I could possibly imagine. And for those of you who wonder about how I feel about it, I've sent my adult children at their request. I've sent, my wife went first, actually. I need to give her credit for that. I went second. Um, I've had my partners go. We support our therapists going. I've encouraged friends to go. And most of all these people haven't gone to ours, of course. We are paying full price for another program. I think ours is the best. Ours is attachment based, more clinically grounded than some of the others. A lot of them are they're more pop psychology and more engaged in kind of recovery based ideas. We have that also, but then we also have attachment theory, right? We're drawing on the masters of therapy, the creators of therapy, you know, Carl Jung, Sigmund Freud, Bowlby, Carl Rogers. We have that. We have that as part of our culture also. So I'm biased towards ours, I guess is what I'm saying. Um, no more questions in the queue. To preserve my throat, I'm happy to move on. I'll take one more if it comes up. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. I read The Audacity to Be You. So if that means anything to you, check those out there. Our charitable partners that we support, and if you want to make donations, choosementalhealth.org, sky's the limit fund.org, and evokefamilyfoundation.org. We have support groups for wilderness current families and alumni. Tomorrow night, April 21st at 6:30 p.m. is the next one. We have one per month for alumni only, so a little bit more advanced. April 26th is that offering at 6:30 p.m. And then we have support groups online for our intensives. All of these are online. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com to register or for more information. We have a new offering in our intensive program. We're trying it. We were told by folks that if we built it, they would come. We have a young adult intensive. We've altered the programming to fit with young adults. We've even made it a little bit shorter over a weekend so that it could fit with the young adult lifestyle. So the young adult intensive, the young adult finding you, essentially, is June 10th through 13th. Again, we expect it to fill up. We're optimistic that it'll fill up. So if there's somebody in your life, you can let them know about that. It's a great, for young adult, it's a great option to get centered. It's a great option to get grounded. It's a great option, a compassionate place to find out a bit about who you are. Our next available offering in person is May 18th. If you haven't looked lately, some of us at Evoke recently bought a bed and breakfast called the Alpenglow Inn in Midway, Utah. And that is where the Evoke Intensives are hosted. So if you want to check that out, you can go to Alpenglow Inn, the Alpenglow Inn. You can Google that, or you can go to Instagram and look at the Alpenglow Inn there. So May 18th to 22nd is our next in-person offering. We also have an online offering June 24th through 26th. Go to intensives@evoketherapy.com for more information. If you've been to a Finding You, Returning to You is the sequel. Like I said, Emma Reedy, not just because she's my daughter, although she is the very talented, very gifted, and those of you who know her will second that. Emma Reedy is going to be leading Returning to You along with Alex White, who is wonderful. May 11th through 15th. That will sell out. That will close. So if you're interested in that, sign up early. If you want a coach for parenting or for life or for marriage or for various issues, we have attachment-based therapists that do coaching. Just contact coaching@evoketherapy.com and we can set you up with a coach. We have pursuit trips, which are individualized adventure trips anywhere in the world, anywhere from 3 days long to 30 days long. Maybe not Antarctica, but every other continent is on the table. Any adventure activities that you want to do, we'll customize it to meet you or your child's needs. Contact Sarah@evoketherapy.com for more information. I already mentioned the 12-step support groups. All of these broadcasts are available the following day on our social media platforms, on our podcast, on your podcast app, whatever podcast app you use, including SoundCloud. Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast is the name. You can also go to soundcloud.com. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and myself, Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy or @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. You can also find the intensives programs on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives, and the Evoke Therapy blog that is curated by Malia. She does a wonderful job of that. New content each week. You can go to the Evoke Therapy blog for supporter content there. Our next broadcast will be next week, April 27th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. We'll be talking about Evoke family work and family walkabouts more in depth. Sounds like the crowd that attended tonight would be a great audience for that because there are a lot of questions about families. So looks like we have no more questions. Thank you for joining me. I hope it's a helpful point of contact for and in behalf of those that love you and that you love. Thank you for being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll see you on the 27th. Take care. Bye-bye.